So let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. For our listeners not familiar with the Owls defense, what kind of scheme does Coach Withers run there?
Yeah, so technically, I guess you would call it a 4-3. Coach Withers is all about trying to load the box, but a lot of the times Temple will line up in a 4-2-5 is what it usually pans out being, and that's what you're going to primarily see as their base defense. Aside from when they probably play the triple option teams of Army and Navy, where they will run the 4-3 more to just try to shut down the run there. So this will be their second year under Coach Everett Withers, who returned to Temple after Temple lost their defensive coordinator to the Eagles a couple years ago. So that's where they're at. Obviously, their defense needs to improve because it has not been good the last couple seasons. They need to see a vast improvement and possibly return to those days where, DJ Elliott was running the Temple defense in Stan Drayton's first year, and they were at least, getting to the quarterback and they were shutting down the pass and at least keeping themselves in games opposed to being blown out. So that is something that's going to desperately need a change, and they brought in a lot of new faces on the defensive side of the ball.
Well, let's start on that defensive line. It's going to look green here in 2024. Between the portal and graduation, the Owls lost Jerquavion Mahoney, Davian Hood, Zamir Cobbs. However, the team brings back guys like Conlon Green, Alan Hay, and Demerick Morris. They also add Cameron Stewart from Rutgers here before the spring. How did that group look in the spring?
Yeah, again, this is unfortunately another position group who was depleted by injuries last year. I think out of everybody you mentioned there, everybody was injured except Conlon Green at one point or another. Mahone missed a couple games. Hood missed a couple games. Cobbs was a walk-on who cost Temple a game there at the end of the season. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but he solely cost them a game against USF that they could have possibly won because of a stupid penalty that he just let his emotions get out of the control and get the better of him there. But like you mentioned, those three are gone. They have Conlon Green, who was a true freshman last year, playing a lot of snaps. He's returning. Alan Hayes coming off of an injury, who he tore his ACL last season. Demerick Morris was banged up quite a bit last season, off and on. He was injured in the spring game, but he's a full go again. Alan Hay is a full go. It's going to be whether, again, this unit can stay healthy. It is desperately needed that they stop the run, because that is where teams have just taken advantage of this team the last several years, is they are able to control this clock, run the ball down their throat, get that defense tired, and then they just beat them with a big play, either in the run or the pass game. So, it's good to have guys that have now played a lot and they have depth there because of the injuries that they've kind of suffered the last couple years. But it's whether they're now going to mesh together and they're going to be able to play as an established unit. The good thing is that they're probably going to just play, a two nose tackle front, and then they're going to have two other guys playing more on the edge as edge rushers. You mentioned Cameron Stewart from Rutgers. He's going to be more one of those edge guys, but I think he has the ability to move inside if they need him to, and have a little bit more of a mobile or more athletic nose tackle. And then they added a guy from FAU, Latrell Jean, after the spring, who was highly complimented by Florida Atlantic coach Tom Herman last week at the American Athletic Conference, kickoff conference. My editor for my site at owlsdaily.com, Sean Pastor, he specifically asked Coach Herman about Latrell, and he complimented him to the highest regards and said, I hope he's going to get what he's looking for there. He's still a proud FAU alum, but I hope, all the best for him. And he's just a freakishly athletic, big bodied, experienced defensive tackle that they wanted back at FAU.
So you mentioned Stewart and Gene. Who are the other two that are probably going to make up this line?
Yeah, I think Stewart starts at one end, and then Gene and Hay or Morris are going to be the starting D tackles. Demerick is a guy who I probably anticipate earning a single digit for Temple, just given the struggles he's been through, the adversity he's overcome, and now having been the most experienced and veteran guy in that room, I would say he's probably the guy that's going to end up starting at the other DT position opposite Gene. And then I think they actually tend to go with a smaller edge rusher on the opposite side. I think that ends up probably being Trey Thomas, who technically is listed as a linebacker, but he's more of an edge guy. He's a guy that played there a lot last year. He, just more quick off the edge, a little bit more speed there. And I think he's going to be a guy that probably ends up making up that other edge.
All right, well, let's talk about that linebacking group. They lose their leading tackler, Jordan McGee, to the NFL. Their third and fourth leading tacklers from a year ago have also graduated. Like you talk about here, this room is highlighted by Trey Thomas. Is again, he's on there as a linebacker, but yeah, playing more of that edge. How did this linebacking group look in the spring?
Yeah, I think this is probably the biggest question mark on the team that I have heading into fall camp and into the season, because they brought in 7 new linebackers this offseason. It's going to be the biggest crapshoot, I would say. It's hard to say who's going to start at this point, I think, because they were just rotating guys in left and right and trying out different combinations. I think they were just trying to see what was going to stick throughout the spring, and I think you're going to see that here the first couple weeks of camp as well. But I think what they were trying to do there is to try to take some of the workload off some of those guys who are playing every down and just establish some depth, because, again, they had injuries there last year that really hurt them. You mentioned Jordan McGee, who's now with the Commanders in the NFL. Obviously, he's a huge loss to replace and big shoes to fill there. So it's going to be quite a challenge to replace those guys. But, I think that's why they made linebackers such a priority in their recruiting cycle, because they need to replace that production, and they need some very athletic, versatile linebackers who can cover a lot of ground in this type of defensive scheme that Withers wants to run.
And you mentioned, they kind of looked at the linebackers to recruit in the portal. Did anybody stand out to you in the spring? Anybody that was coming back or any of these transfers?
Yeah, I think Tyquan King from East Carolina is a guy who was praised early on by Withers and Coach Chris Woods, who's the linebackers coach at Temple. They really like his game. He's really athletic, really long, speedy. Eric Stewart's another guy who got a lot of work. They really like him out of the JUCO level. He very well could be the first or second team linebacker. He was getting reps with the ones in the spring game. But I think right now they're going to probably, if I had to put money on it right now, have 2 guys who are more familiar with the system be the starters come week 1, in Antoine Santiago and DJ Woodbury. Woodbury started to see more playing time towards the middle of the season last year, and then unfortunately he suffered a season-ending injury where he was not able to practice throughout the spring as well. So Woodbury, I would say he was a guy that kind of has that veteran presence that they're looking for, who already knows the system. He's been here 4 years now. I think he's probably going to end up being that Jordan McGee-esque player, or he's going to be the signal caller for the defense, basically. And Santiago is just a guy who's, again, similar to Reese Clark, Stan Drayton has praised about his maturity, how he's actually taken his development seriously to get to the point where he is. And now he has an opportunity to become that starting linebacker that they really need. And I think he might be the guy that ends up getting that second linebacker spot for them.
Well, this defensive backfield lost a decent chunk of guys to the portal, and then the team's second leading tackler from a year ago, Twan Francis, graduated. However, the portal taketh And the portal giveth. If my counting's correct, they brought in 6 transfers. What should we expect from this defensive backfield in 2024?
Yeah, kind of like this is where they lost the majority of their players, and they lost the majority of their production from last year as far as percentage of snaps taken on their team. It's going to be pretty much a whole new backfield. I think the only guy who probably will see significant playing time, or the only 2 guys who played a little bit last year, was Elijah Darraville and Ben Asuike, who are both corners. Other than that, it's going to be 2 new safeties, 3 new safeties if you really count if they throw in that they call it a Sam position or an owl position. They have different terminologies for it at Temple, but it's going to be quite interesting to see how some of these guys mesh together, because they're all coming from different levels of college football and obviously have had different successes and different experiences in getting to this point. We saw what we would like to have seen from the safeties in the spring, especially. I thought the safeties looked phenomenal in the spring game, led by Andres Keaton, who comes to Temple from Western Carolina, was an all-conference player at the FCS level there at Western Carolina with the Catamounts. I think he's really going to be a guy to watch this year for Temple. I think he is sneaky good and could be competing for all conference honors in the American this year. And another guy, Javier Morton, looked really good in the spring. He was being moved around to different positions. He was playing a little bit of that owl position that Temple likes to call it. He was playing traditional free safety. He was playing strong safety, and he just looks like a guy who's kind of a Swiss Army knife that they have back there. As far as cornerbacks go, I think what they lined up with in the spring game was Darraville had moved from safety to corner because he's a little quicker and a little smaller frame. So I'm thinking that they want a little bit more speed at that corner position with him now moving there, just because they've had such a problem in getting beat deep the last couple years. So he moves to corner now, and then Torrey Richardson, who's a guy from UTEP who transferred in. Again, very solid, experienced starting cornerback at UTEP, who I think Temple's hoping that can come in and, be just that lockdown number 1 corner, because they lost Jalen McMurray to Tennessee this offseason. He was their number 1 corner, obviously, having transferred up. They need that guy who's going to be reliable, and that's just going to shut down teams opposing number 1s.
So when we mentioned earlier, Taiwan Francis playing more of that like owl, that Sam kind of role there, coming down. Who's going to step up into that particular position, do you think?
Yeah, I think the guy that probably is going to actually step up into that safety position is going to be either Javier Morton or Jalen Lewis. Jalen Lewis is another guy who they brought in this offseason who transferred in from Arkansas. Very versatile player, again, has played corner in the past, has a relationship with Temple's secondary coach, Dominique Bowman, who was at Arkansas when he was recruited there. So knows him, knows his play style, and I think that Dominique Bowman's going to obviously put him in the best position where Jalen's going to get to play and succeed, and he might very well be that owl position that has that versatility, and where he might have to go down and play a little linebacker, but also can back off into coverage. And another guy, Ashim Smith-Marset, he looked really good in the spring game. He made a couple pass breakups, some big hits. He's a guy who came in late and signed with Temple late last recruiting cycle as part of the 2023 class. And obviously in less than a year, he earned his way onto starting with the number 1 defense in the spring game. And he's making plays. So I think he's gonna be in that equation to possibly see playing time and make an impact with the Temple defense. And he just comes from good genes. His brother's in the NFL, I believe won a Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs. So that is the Smith Marset, who has an NFL pedagogy.
Well, if you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who'd that be?
Yeah, I want to say that a guy I haven't mentioned, who I neglected, who had a really good season last year for Temple and was one of the bright spots after transferring in from Florida, was Dewan Black. He's another guy who kind of plays that same position Trey Thomas does. He's probably not as, I don't want to say as athletic. He's not as versed, I guess, as doesn't have as wide of a skill set, I guess, as Trey Thomas does as far as football is. But Dewan Black is probably the most athletic player on Temple's team. He is just a freak athlete, and he is long, he is fast, and he is a mean player. And I think when he gets on the field, Temple or opposing teams' offensive lines need to factor him in and double cover him, because he is just a guy who will get to the quarterback at whatever cost. And he is just a guy who has a chip on his shoulder after, leaving Florida and having been at the JUCO level for several years. He's just a guy who wants to make a name for himself. So he's a guy I would like to really see step up, and maybe he expanded his skill set in the offseason, and maybe he makes a little bit more of an impact on the team than he did last year.